Hey y'all, I hope everyone's having a great week. This is going to be the third installation in our weekly videos of kind of reading tips for how to navigate your way through the American Yawp. So like I always say, you really want to pay attention to chapter titles, section titles. These things let you know what the chapter or section will be discussing, and you can then thereby kind of relate it back to what you're learning in class and kind of have a discussion with yourself, kind of juggling all of these ideas. And so I know this week's focus for y'all and Professor Flager is industrial society and progressive reform. This is clearly over the progressive era. So that lets us know that we're really getting into these reforms, how they came about, and what they were against. Clearly, we see that things such as class inequality, unregulated industry with both of these, and political corruption were certainly among the concerns of the working class at this time. Which is also a quick reminder, always use your multimodalities to enhance your reading of the work. It just gives you a more well-rounded idea of it. And so, like I said, these were obviously all issues that are going to be touched upon, but if we look at the table of contents, which you should also always do, it lets us know, like I said, even more of these issues and things that were being targeted, such as the emerging women's movement, a very large backlash against the trusts, an emerging environmentalism movement, which is interesting. Even back then, people were starting to become aware, and what would turn into the civil rights movement also seems to be touched upon in this. So that's good. So there is a part in here. This part. Americans interjected themselves into public life and advocated new reforms to tame the runaway world of the Golden Age. I think sentences like that can let you know more or less what the entire chapter is going to be discussing, right? It's this kind of emerging activist movement, and kind of this like rising consciousness as people began to kind of organize themselves and combat against these like systemic injustices, right? And so that was kind of elaborated. Well, I'll take a short detour here. Once again, name and date. It means it's important. It has its own paragraph. Take note of this. Always do that. If something has a name, a specific name, or a specific year or date, that means it's important. And so as I was saying, it's important, if this chapter is discussing kind of this rising wave of activism, to take note of their methods. How did they go about organizing themselves? We can see them kind of turning to publications, books, magazines, things like that. I actually think this is very important, and this almost might call back some stuff we discussed last semester about Gramsci and about cultural hegemony. For anyone who maybe forgot or something, all of the devices that are in charge of ideology and ideas, the church, the media, such as movies, magazines, newspapers, news channels, like literally anything that you would think is ideological, is owned by the people who very simply can afford to own it. And so these are not just free newspapers. These are giant corporations, and the everyday person has no real say on what CNN covers or not. And so because of that, everything that the workers see is constantly filtered through a very masculine, a very wealthy, and a very white perspective. And so we can kind of interpret these this increase in critical books being circulated and pamphlets, magazines. We can interpret that as kind of them building this public sphere, right? As I know we've been talking about this in Dr. Martin's. We build this public sphere to combat the hegemony that we are surrounded by. I think that's very important. And I'm trying to find this other section. And so as I was saying, the spreading of these publications was the workers' way of kind of combating the hegemony of the boss. And we see this interestingly enough, also reflected in the cultural sphere, such as this novel, which, like I said, any specific name, right? Any specific date, person, these are all important things, so that let you know you're going to want to pay attention here. This novel was also could be seen as like a anti-hegemonic piece of art. And so as you make your way through chapter 20, just be sure that you are keeping in mind, Gramsci's hegemony and kind of the idea of the public sphere that we've been discussing, and just kind of look for ways on how to connect those with what you will find discussed in this chapter. And I think you guys should be in good shape on the progressive reforms. Have a good week, y'all.